The private jet hummed softly, its cabin polished to perfection, filled with the quiet murmur of elite passengers. Every detail screamed luxury: soft leather seats, chrome accents, soft ambient lighting reflecting off the glossy surfaces, and subtle artwork lining the walls. It was a sanctuary of wealth, power, and control. At the center of this carefully curated world sat Malik Carter, a black CEO whose name carried weight across continents. Dressed in a tailored dark navy suit, crisp white shirt, and polished shoes, he exuded authority without effort. His presence didn't demand attention, it commanded it naturally. Around him, staff quietly served champagne and gourmet hors d'oeuvres, their movements precise, almost rehearsed, maintaining the illusion that the VIP section was unassailable. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. A sudden commotion broke the calm. A white passenger, young, arrogant, dressed in designer clothing, had decided that the VIP section was his playground. He shoved a briefcase onto Malik's seat, scoffing, and muttering complaints about service and seating arrangements. The cabin staff hesitated, unsure how to handle the breach. The other passengers glanced nervously, sensing the tension spike. Luxury and etiquette were being shattered by raw entitlement. Malik, calm as ever, raised a single eyebrow. He didn't yell, he didn't gesture, he simply observed. The passenger's audacity was blatant, but Malik's experience had taught him that true power required patience and precision, not impulsive retaliation. The staff, visibly anxious, tried to intervene, moving closer to defuse the situation, but their hesitancy only emboldened the unruly passenger.
"Excuse me,"
Malik said finally, his voice low, calm, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "This is my seat." The passenger looked up, smirking. "Well, it's a seat. You can find another one, VIP or not. It's first come, first served." Malik's eyes didn't waver. "No, I'm here, and this seat is mine." The arrogance of the man was palpable, but the room began to feel the shift. Other passengers leaned forward slightly, observing the interaction. Even the staff froze, realizing this wasn't a typical dispute. Malik's presence transformed the simple conflict into something far more consequential. This was a battle of awareness, authority, and invisible hierarchy. The airline staff, feeling pressure from both sides, approached cautiously. One of the attendants whispered to Malik, "Sir, should we move him?" But Malik shook his head slightly, not refusal, just observation. He wanted to measure, to calibrate, to ensure that every response was deliberate, not reactionary. The unruly passenger, sensing hesitation from the staff, pushed further. "Come on, move it. You're not even supposed to be here." At that, the cabin's tension escalated. Passengers stopped whatever casual interactions they had been engaged in, their eyes darting between Malik and the man. The staff's fear and uncertainty were evident. They didn't want to make a mistake, and they certainly didn't want to challenge someone they didn't yet fully understand. The arrogance of the white passenger had collided directly with the calm authority of Malik Carter. Then, unexpectedly, a senior flight attendant stepped forward, trying to enforce protocol. "Sir, please, we need to resolve this peacefully." The man scoffed, ignoring the instruction, continuing to assert dominance. He assumed that status in the cabin, wealth, privilege, and entitlement, was sufficient to override etiquette and authority. Malik's calm eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't speak again immediately. He simply observed, analyzing every expression, every micro-movement. His mind catalogued the arrogance, the lack of respect, the potential for escalation. He noted how staff were frozen, unsure whether to intervene, and how the other passengers reacted, some fearful, some curious, all aware that the equilibrium of this luxurious microcosm had been disrupted. Finally, Malik rose slowly, not in anger, not in haste, but with precision. The movement alone demanded attention. The staff instinctively straightened, and the unruly passenger, for the first time, paused mid-sentence. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The room now recognized where authority truly lay. "Please step aside," Malik said quietly, his voice calm, but every syllable carried unspoken consequence. "You've overstepped." His composure was absolute. There was no room for negotiation or denial. This was the authority of someone who commanded not through volume, but presence. The man hesitated, sensing the gravity of the moment. He could feel the room's attention, the weight of observation, and the subtle movement of the staff aligning with Malik's authority. It was then, in that pause, that the first real understanding of the impending consequence settled in. Entitlement alone could not defy power. Not here, not in this cabin, not before Malik Carter. The senior flight attendant signaled subtly to other staff. Malik's calm nod allowed them to act, but in accordance with his authority. They escorted the unruly passenger to a separate seat at the back of the cabin. The man's arrogance faltered slightly. His smirk had begun to fade. Passengers returned to observing discreetly, understanding that this wasn't a trivial adjustment. It was a demonstration of dominance, executed silently, efficiently, and without spectacle. Once the passenger was relocated, Malik returned to his VIP seat. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand apologies. The simple act of reclaiming his place, the composed manner in which it was done, reverberated authority throughout the cabin. Staff realigned themselves, every movement precise. The room's energy had shifted completely. Respect had been restored, not by confrontation, but by subtle, absolute command. Yet the real moment of consequence was just beginning. As the cabin settled, Malik tapped his tablet discreetly. Notifications began cascading through internal channels. Corporate teams, security, and executive assistants were now aware of the incident in real time. Within minutes, careers would be adjusted, permissions recalibrated, and authority reasserted beyond the cabin itself. The unraveling consequences of the unruly passenger's arrogance had begun, silently but inexorably. And while the passenger sat at the back, confused and uneasy, the VIP cabin had already learned the most important lesson of the flight. True authority is measured not by volume or aggression, but by calm presence, measured action, and precise execution. Malik Carter's silent observation had already begun the cascade that would leave no misjudgment uncorrected. The cabin had settled after Malik Carter reclaimed his VIP seat, but the tension lingered like a thick fog. The unruly white passenger slouched in the back, muttering under his breath, unaware of the storm that had quietly begun. The staff who had initially flinched under his arrogance now moved with subtle caution, aware that their every gesture was being observed, catalogued, and mentally assessed by the CEO. Malik remained calm. Not a single muscle betrayed impatience or anger. His hands rested lightly on the armrest, his posture immaculate. This was authority in its purest form, measured, silent, and undeniable. The cabin staff, executive assistants, and even the other passengers were acutely aware of it. Their eyes shifted subtly toward him, instinctively acknowledging that the real power in the room was seated quietly before them. The senior flight attendant approached, maintaining distance. "Sir, shall I handle the situation further?" she asked quietly, almost in a whisper. Malik's eyes flicked toward her briefly. "Observe and report. Every reaction is important," he replied, his tone even, controlled. The subtle command left no room for doubt. The staff nodded slightly, understanding the invisible but absolute authority radiating from him. At the same time, Malik tapped his tablet lightly. Notifications began cascading through internal corporate channels. Security teams were alerted discreetly. Legal and executive assistants received encrypted messages detailing the passenger's disruptive behavior. Within minutes, the incident would be documented, analyzed, and addressed. Careers would be adjusted, permissions recalibrated, and the arrogance of entitlement would meet structured, unavoidable consequences. Malik's calm observation had already set in motion a sequence that the passenger, and even the staff, could not comprehend. The unruly passenger glanced around, sensing the sudden shift in the cabin. Whispers began circulating among the passengers. Some pulled out phones discreetly, capturing moments of subtle authority. Others leaned in, curious. Even his friends, who had been laughing earlier, now looked uneasy. The realization began to dawn on him. The man he had tried to dominate in the cabin had not only regained his position, but had silently orchestrated the correction of the entire environment. Malik finally spoke, his voice low, precise, carrying the weight of command without volume. "Your behavior is unacceptable. You have disrupted the protocol and decorum of this flight." The words were calm, yet every syllable resonated with finality. The staff and passengers froze. Even the unruly passenger's smirk faltered. He had expected confrontation or chaos, not the surgical precision of quiet authority. Another ping came from Malik's device. The legal team had begun drafting formal notices. HR and internal compliance departments were reviewing actions taken and preparing documentation. Within minutes, a formal disciplinary path would be triggered for anyone complicit in enabling the passenger's disruptive conduct. Malik's presence and controlled response had already dictated outcomes that would extend far beyond the physical confines of the cabin. The staff watched nervously. Their earlier hesitation had given way to careful compliance. They moved efficiently now, without drawing attention, as they awaited Malik's next subtle cue. The flight attendant who had initially suggested intervention now positioned herself strategically to observe, documenting every reaction, her anxiety palpable. The realization of consequences settled over them like gravity. A single misstep or misjudgment could now result in formal reprimand, career recalibration, or public exposure. Meanwhile, the unruly passenger attempted to assert himself once more, adjusting his tie, leaning forward, attempting to regain confidence. "Come on, this is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. Malik's gaze fell on him, unwavering, not angry, not punitive, simply present, observing, calculating. The silent authority in that look alone communicated a message louder than words. Every action from this point on would be scrutinized, and the power balance had irrevocably shifted. Passengers leaned back, sensing the subtle change in dynamics. Conversations that had been casual minutes earlier now halted mid-word. The air felt charged. The cabin staff moved quietly, efficiently, as if aware that their movements were being evaluated in real time. Each gesture, every step, every glance mattered. Malik had demonstrated control without aggression, but the ripple effect of authority had reached every corner of the cabin. Malik's assistant sent another discreet notification. Executive teams, legal counsel, and security were now fully aligned, prepared to act once the flight landed. The documentation was comprehensive: passenger misconduct, staff response, and the CEO's intervention. Within minutes, consequences would be enforced with surgical precision. Malik's calm had transformed the impulsive behavior of the passenger and any staff hesitancy into a fully traceable chain of accountability. The unruly passenger finally sat down, pale and uneasy. His friends exchanged nervous glances, the confidence that had emboldened them minutes earlier evaporating completely. Malik did not need to issue any direct threat. The structured authority, procedural readiness, and calm presence were enough. In this room, power was now visible, absolute, and inescapable. Malik leaned back slightly, his hands folded. "Let this serve as a lesson," he said quietly, addressing the room without raising his voice. "Behavior has consequences, and authority is earned, not assumed." The words resonated across the cabin. Staff and passengers alike understood that the equilibrium had shifted, the rules had changed, and those who failed to recognize it would face immediate, structured consequences once the formal channels were executed. The unruly passenger's hands clenched slightly, the first sign of true fear crossing his expression. He had assumed entitlement was enough to bend the environment to his will. He now understood that he had miscalculated. He had not just been corrected, he had been observed, evaluated, and silently processed through the framework of corporate authority. The balance had shifted irrevocably. Malik finally relaxed subtly in his seat, a calm smile playing at the corner of his lips. Not arrogance, not gloating, just absolute control. The room had learned the lesson. Consequences were inevitable. Authority had been quietly reasserted, and the ripple of accountability had begun, silently but unmistakably. The cabin's quiet murmur had turned into a tense, watchful silence. Every passenger and staff member now felt the weight of Malik Carter's presence. The unruly white passenger, who had caused the initial disruption, had stopped fidgeting. The arrogance that had radiated from him earlier was gone, replaced by unease. He realized, perhaps too late, that he had misjudged not only the authority in the room, but the man behind it. Executives and staff began checking their phones discreetly. Notifications pinged quietly, one after the other, cascading from Malik's assistant to the internal corporate system. Legal teams were reviewing protocols, HR was monitoring the behavioral incident, security was quietly confirming access points and situational control. Every micro-movement within the cabin was being logged, not by force or intimidation, but through the silent efficiency of a man whose calm authority could orchestrate a domino effect with a single glance. Malik's eyes swept over the staff. They were trembling, some subtly, some openly. Every gesture, a hand twitch, a shift of posture, a hesitant step, was noted, catalogued, and assessed. The lesson was clear. Authority is not about yelling or dominance. It is about presence, awareness, and the ability to execute consequences without spectacle. The unruly passenger shifted uncomfortably, finally realizing that his entitlement had collided with true control. His smirk faltered, his body language shrinking in response to the unspoken evaluation. Malik didn't raise his voice, he didn't yell, he simply observed. And in that observation, the entire cabin felt the shift in hierarchy. A senior flight attendant approached subtly, whispering to the assistant nearby, "Sir, should we..." Malik's calm gaze fell on them briefly, and his simple nod communicated everything. Continue observing, document all reactions, and wait for the full process to unfold. The staff straightened immediately, understanding the gravity of the silent command. Minutes passed, each one building tension in the cabin. Executives glanced nervously at their devices. The unruly passenger finally attempted to assert himself, leaning forward slightly, trying to regain composure. Malik's gaze locked onto him, unwavering. The message was clear without words. Any further missteps would be catalogued and addressed with precise consequence. Suddenly, the cabin's communication systems pinged discreetly. Notifications from Malik's assistant confirmed that the corporate review protocol had been activated. The unruly passenger's behavior was being recorded, evaluated, and prepared for action as soon as the aircraft landed. HR, legal, and PR teams were now fully engaged. Careers and reputations were about to be recalibrated based on this incident. The passenger's previous confidence was replaced with palpable anxiety. Malik shifted slightly, folding his hands in front of him. He didn't need to say anything. The air itself was now charged with understanding. Every passenger and staff member realized that the man they had underestimated controlled not only the immediate situation, but also the cascading consequences. The VIP seat, the cabin, and the silent hierarchy were all under his orchestration. The unruly passenger's eyes darted nervously. He tried to speak. I didn't. Malik raised a single hand slightly, a subtle gesture that immediately stilled him. Silence fell. It wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It was the acknowledgement of absolute authority. The cabin had absorbed the lesson. Arrogance and entitlement could be dismantled without a single raised voice when measured control and presence were applied. Malik's assistant discreetly tapped a few more commands on the tablet. Legal documents were queued. Notifications to corporate executives and the board were confirmed. The unruly passenger, for the first time, understood that the incident would extend beyond this flight. Reputations, permissions, and future interactions would all be affected. The consequences were immediate, systemic, and inevitable. The Black CEO finally spoke, his voice low but carrying the weight of finality. Let this be a lesson in conduct and respect. Anyone who fails to recognize boundaries will face accountability. His words were calm, measured, and precise. There was no need for anger, no need for spectacle. The authority in his tone and posture was sufficient. Passengers exchanged nervous glances, some whispering. The staff nodded subtly, realigning their behavior with a newfound understanding. The unruly passenger slouched further, his earlier confidence completely eroded. The cabin had internalized the lesson. Power is not in the title, nor in the seat, nor in entitlement. It is in presence, awareness, and the ability to execute consequences methodically. The minutes stretched on, each one reinforcing the shift. Malik observed quietly, letting the structured authority settle. The systems were in motion, notifications were flowing, careers, reputations, and hierarchies would be adjusted with precision the moment the flight touched down. The unruly passenger understood fully now. He was no longer in control. The lesson was complete, and the silent authority of Malik Carter had been established permanently. Malik leaned back slightly, folding his hands neatly in front of him. Calm, composed, authoritative. The cabin had witnessed a total reversal of hierarchy in mere minutes, and every observer, staff and passenger alike, understood the truth. Disrespect and arrogance were no longer tolerated. The moment had passed, but the consequences had already been activated, cascading beyond the immediate environment, affecting every connected corporate and operational layer. The Black CEO had not raised his voice, had not shouted, had not needed to. And yet the result was absolute. Respect restored, order reasserted, and the unruly passenger fully aware that their behavior had triggered systemic consequences far beyond their comprehension. The cabin atmosphere had shifted completely. No one spoke louder than a whisper, and even that seemed too intrusive. Malik Carter, the Black CEO, remained in his VIP seat, composed, almost statuesque. His dark navy suit and crisp white shirt were impeccable, reflecting the understated authority that radiated from him without effort. The unruly white passenger, whose arrogance had initiated the disruption, slouched uneasily in the rear of the cabin. His designer attire now seemed a costume of entitlement that had no weight in the face of true authority. He glanced repeatedly at Malik, attempting to read some emotional reaction that would never come. The calm observation alone carried a power far beyond his comprehension. Staff were adjusting around the cabin. The senior flight attendant and assistants moved discreetly, maintaining decorum, but their hands shook slightly. Their earlier confidence had been shattered. Every gesture they now made was carefully calibrated, aware that any misstep would be recorded, evaluated, and could result in professional consequence. Malik had subtly activated a chain of accountability that extended beyond immediate observation. Malik's assistant tapped on a tablet discreetly. Notifications cascaded instantly to legal, HR, and security teams. Within minutes, internal protocols would be triggered, disciplinary action, behavioral documentation, and a review of compliance procedures. The ripple of consequences extended far beyond the cabin itself. This was not punishment, it was structural correction, executed silently, efficiently, and absolutely. The unruly passenger tried again, leaning forward slightly. I just wanted to speak to the crew. His voice faltered under Malik's gaze. The CEO's calm eyes fixed on him, unflinching, and the room felt smaller. It was as if the walls themselves acknowledged who commanded control. The power dynamics had shifted irrevocably. The passenger's entitlement had been neutralized without a single raised voice, without theatrics, purely through measured authority. Nearby staff whispered nervously among themselves. Some adjusted their positions, others subtly documented the interactions. Every reaction, every micro-expression, every movement was being logged into a mental map of accountability. Malik's subtle nods and minor gestures directed the response without anyone explicitly noticing. The staff, the passenger, and even the observing clients were now participants in a controlled demonstration of absolute authority. Minutes passed. Phones vibrated quietly as encrypted notifications went out to corporate executives. Legal teams began drafting formal notices. HR prepared immediate performance and behavioral reports. Security teams reviewed protocols and access logs. In the cabin, it was silent and composed. Outside the cabin, the corporate machinery had begun executing consequences with precision. Careers, reputations, and privileges were now all subject to immediate recalibration. Malik finally spoke, not in anger, not in a raised voice, just calm, deliberate, precise. All conduct in this cabin will be documented. Any future deviations from protocol will be met with corrective action. Everyone here understands what that means. His voice, though quiet, reverberated through the cabin like a gavel hitting a desk. Staff and passengers instinctively acknowledged that the shift was complete. Authority had been reasserted, silently, perfectly, and without spectacle. The white passenger's face had gone pale. He understood now that this was not about negotiation or debate. His previous privilege and arrogance meant nothing. The systems, both human and corporate, were responding under Malik's direction. The authority in the cabin was no longer theoretical. Every misstep, every breath, every gesture could now carry professional consequence. Executives and VIP passengers quietly observed. The lesson was clear. Power was measured by composure, control, and presence, not by volume or entitlement. Malik's calm had transformed an impulsive disruption into a cascading structural correction that would affect careers, reputations, and contracts the moment the flight landed. Malik's assistant quietly tapped again, sending a final set of instructions. Legal and HR were now fully mobilized. The disciplinary and compliance processes were underway. Within minutes, the unruly passenger, any complacent staff, and anyone associated with the incident would face immediate review. Malik had ensured that the system itself was the instrument of consequence. The passenger shifted in his seat, fear now replacing arrogance. He glanced around at the staff, some avoiding eye contact, others frozen in place. Malik's presence was enough to communicate everything. The consequences were inevitable. No explanation, no drama, no debate, just absolute authority manifested silently. Malik stood slightly, allowing the cabin to feel the subtle shift in posture. Staff instinctively straightened. Passengers returned to observing discreetly, aware that a demonstration of control had been completed. The balance of power had been permanently recalibrated. The unruly passenger had been neutralized. The staff aligned, and the VIP cabin returned to equilibrium. But, under Malik's authority, unquestionable and total, he finally returned to his seat, folding his hands lightly. Calm, composed, and dominant, Malik Carter's presence left a lasting impression. Authority need not be loud to be absolute. Every observer in the cabin understood that what had begun as a minor disruption had been corrected, and the consequences were already in motion, extending beyond the flight, beyond the staff, and into the corporate network connected to the CEO. The cabin remained quiet, the hum of engines the only sound. The unruly passenger slouched, defeated, understanding that every privilege he had assumed was gone. The staff moved subtly, obeying protocol under the CEO's silent oversight. The corporate and human systems Malik had activated would ensure accountability was enforced efficiently, permanently, and without emotion. And in that quiet, tense, perfectly controlled environment, the lesson became clear to everyone. Arrogance, entitlement, and disruption have no power when confronted with calm authority, executed with precision. Malik Carter, the Black CEO, had reclaimed control, restored order, and silently initiated consequences that would resonate far beyond the VIP cabin, ensuring that every misjudgment was corrected, every privilege recalibrated, and every observer reminded of the unassailable dominance of true leadership. The cabin was silent, yet the silence was heavy. Every passenger, every staff member, and every executive assistant felt the invisible weight of authority that had settled in the room. Malik Carter, the Black CEO, sat upright in his VIP seat. His tailored dark navy suit and crisp white shirt gleamed subtly under the cabin's soft lights, yet it was his presence, calm, composed, unshakable, that commanded attention. The unruly white passenger, who had caused the disruption minutes ago, now sat rigidly at the back of the cabin. His designer attire, which had earlier radiated entitlement and arrogance, now seemed almost like a costume for humiliation. Every micro-expression, the quick dart of his eyes, the slight trembling of his hands, the suppressed breath between words, betrayed his growing realization. He had miscalculated the authority in the room. Staff who had initially hesitated now moved with tense precision. The senior flight attendant and assistants documented the situation discreetly, their movements synchronized and carefully calculated. Any further mistake would now be irrevocable. Malik had activated a sequence of accountability that extended beyond the cabin, encompassing corporate oversight, legal review, and HR monitoring. The ripple of consequences was already in motion. Malik finally spoke, his voice calm, deliberate, and carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. All conduct in this cabin has been noted. Any deviation from protocol will be met with consequences. The words were not raised in anger, yet they reverberated with a force stronger than any shout. The staff straightened. Passengers leaned forward subtly. Even the unruly passenger felt the cold, unyielding precision in those words. He had believed entitlement was enough to bend reality to his will. Now he understood, far too late, that true authority was measured not by arrogance but by presence, observation, and the ability to execute consequences silently and absolutely. Minutes passed. Malik's assistant tapped a few commands on a tablet discreetly. Notifications cascaded instantly to the corporate legal department, HR teams, and executive assistants. Internal review was activated, compliance protocols were enforced, and disciplinary measures were cued. By the time the plane touched down, the unruly passenger and any complicit staff would face immediate professional repercussions. Careers would be adjusted, reputations recalibrated, and privileges removed. Malik's calm had set in motion a perfectly structured consequence. The unruly passenger, now facing the consequences of his actions, could do nothing but acknowledge the authority he had once defied. Malik's calm, measured, and deliberate presence had not only restored order, but also reasserted the immutable lesson: respect and conduct are non-negotiable in the presence of true authority. The cabin lights reflected off polished surfaces, the hum of the engines became the soundtrack to a lesson learned, and Malik Carter remained seated briefly, composed, before rising and walking with Amara past the stunned passengers and staff. The doors closed behind them, finality complete. Silence, respect, and an indelible demonstration of authority filled the space. In the aftermath, everyone present understood it. Entitlement has limits, and authority, when executed with precision and calm, is absolute. Malik Carter had reclaimed control, restored order, and enforced consequence with a quiet efficiency that would be remembered for years to come.